So let my life be the proof of your love. Let my love look like you and what you made of.
Okay, we have been doing this little mini series on the family, on the marriage, and we talked about husband-wife before God, husband-wife before each other. We have talked about the husband in particular, the wife in particular, the roles and the design that God has designed it. And when we talk about design, God's design, we need to know that that is holy. Anything in creation, the way God intended it, the way God designed it, it's holy. So anything that varies from that or changes from that is a violation of God's holiness. And that means it's unholy. And we can come to very obvious examples, like a woman being married to a woman, a man being married to a man. No, that's not God's design. It's not about us being judgmental, looking down at people, feeling superior to them. No, it's violation of God's design. And so within a husband and wife as well. When we violate God's design, then it becomes unholy. And once something becomes unholy, what can we expect out of that? What wisdom can we expect out of that? No, we expect destruction. We expect hurt and dishonoring and dishonoring of God, dishonoring of one another. Anytime there's unholiness, right? So those are just general things. We talked about, again, the husband in particular, the wife in particular. And then we started the section on the problem of the fall. The problem of the fall. And we talked about the general issues like separation from God, alienation from one another, spiritual death. And then all that comes with it, right? Shame and fear and alienation. And then we talked about the power of each one of those. It's very, very powerful. In fact, there's great manipulation that happens that people use of fear and shame and alienation, the fear of abandonment and so forth. Very, very powerful. And then last week we started talking about the realities of abuses. Realities of abuses. And all this comes under the heading of the fall. When sin entered into the human race, it brought with it all kinds of problems. And so now we have, of course, broken homes, broken relationships. It's a mess. And with that comes the abuses. And we talked about abuse of God's creation in general, right? The abuses of God's creation in general. Worshipping the creature rather than the creator. Romans 1:25, we talked about that. Jeremiah 17, 5 through 6. Now, I went back and I said, I need to point out something that, and I might have said it. Creation is all good. It's all good. The problem is that we abuse creation. All of creation was given to give us a taste of God. It's not God. The problem is that we elevate creation above the Creator. And that becomes the problem. 1 Timothy chapter 6. 1 Timothy chapter 6 is kind of like going back and reviewing a little bit, but because I want to point this out. It's not that we're down on creation. No. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17. Instruct those who are rich in this present world not to be conceited or fix their hopes in the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly supplies us with all things to enjoy. You see that right there? All things to enjoy. Food, sex, travel, to enjoy. But the problem is, right there, it also says, not to be conceited or to fix their hope on the uncertainty of riches. See, riches, a taste of God, of the goodness of God, can be elevated, and all of a sudden, all their hope is there. And once that happens, then everything goes downhill. This is where addictions come, by the way. And I'll say more about that as time goes by. So, again, we're looking at the realities of abuses that happened after the fall, when sin entered the human race, right? So now I want to look now a little bit more specific at, because we're talking about marriage, we're talking about the family, husbands and wives, how they use and abuse each other. And it happens all the time. So here we go. Wives are many times used and abused by the husband. And so with that, turn to Genesis 4. Genesis 4. This is, of course, after Cain killed Abel and God confronted and so forth. And the human race has started to multiply, to grow, right? But the abuses, now look at this husband, Lamech. And look what he does. Genesis chapter 4, verse 23 and 24. Lamech said to his wives, plural. Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, listen to my voice, you wives of Lamech. Give heed to my speech, for I have killed a man for wounded me, and a boy for striking me. If Cain is avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 70-fold. Okay, very good. What was the husband of these wives doing? He was forcing, he was intimidating, he was even using violence to control his wives. And many times, that's what husbands do. They might not do exactly what Lamech is doing, but we men can raise our voice, raise our fist, pound the table, and don't you even, woman, think about crossing me. Macho. Muy macho. And, we do that. And husbands will often do that. Using and abusing the wife, overpowering and intimidation. And this happens. But also, the wives can also use the husband. Men. They can. You don't believe me? Turn to Proverbs. Proverbs 6. Proverbs chapter 6, actually there's, a number of passages that talk about this. This is one of the shorter ones. Proverbs chapter 6, and it's just amazing how we human beings are something else. Proverbs chapter 6, verse 24, the father is talking to a son and saying, look, son, you better watch out. And listen to my advice. Listen to me. Why? Verse 24. Proverbs 6:24. To keep you from the evil woman, from the smooth tongue of the adulteress. Do not desire her beauty in your heart, nor let her capture you with her eyelids. Well, those eyelids can be pretty powerful. Right? For an account of a harlot, one is reduced to a loaf of bread. And an adulteress hunts for the precious life. Isn't that amazing? And wives can do that. Not as dramatic, of course, maybe, but they can do that. They know the weaknesses of the husband and use that. The husbands are brutal. They're beasts. They're overpowering, intimidating, and so forth. The wives can use and abuse the husband as well. Right there in chapter 7. Chapter 7 in verse 6. And wisdom is trying to share, and here's an illustration. Proverbs chapter 7, verse 6. For at the window of my house I looked out through my lattice, and I saw among the naive are not necessarily stupid, they're untrained, inexperienced, among the naive, a young man lacking sense, passing through the street near her corner. And he takes the way of her house in the twilight, in the evening, in the middle of the night, and in the darkness. And behold, a woman comes to meet him, dressed as a harlot and cunning of heart. She is boisterous and rebellious. Her feet do not remain at home. She is now in the streets. She is now in the squares, lurking by every corner. She seizes him and kisses him. And with a brazen face, she says to him, I was due to offer peace offerings. Wow. Religious woman. Today I have paid my vows. Woo. Therefore I have come out to meet you, to seek your presence earnestly. You hunk of a man. Then I have found you. I have spread my couch with coverings, with colored linens of Egypt. I have sprinkled my bed with myrrh and aloes and cinnamon. Come, let us drink our fill of love until morning. Let us delight ourselves with caresses. For my husband is not at home. He has gone on a long journey. He has taken a bag of money with him. At the full moon he will come home. With her many persuasions, she entices him. With her flattering lips, she seduces him. Suddenly, he follows her as an ox goes to the slaughter. As the one who fetters to the discipline of a fool until an arrow pierces through his liver, as a bird hastens to the snare. So he does not know that he will cost him his life. Now, therefore, my son, listen to me and pay attention to the words of my mouth. Do not let your heart turn aside to her ways. Do not stray into her path, for many are the victims she has cast down, and numerous are all her slain. Her house is the way of Sheol, that is death, descending to the chambers of death. The reality that both men and women, husbands and wives, use and abuse each other is the human condition. Again, is the problem of the fall. And God, knowing all that, of course, He sent everything that we need. His Son, His Spirit. He's given us His Word. He's given us people in the church to help us out of that darkness. And so that's what we turn to. But the reality that we have to see, the uses and abuses, both of husband abusing their wife, using their wives, and the wives using and abusing their husbands. It's pretty dark. But then it goes on, where many times the family members, not just the husband and the wife, but family members are used and abused. It's a sad thing, but it happens. Genesis chapter 16, Genesis 16, if you want to be turning there. And this is with Abraham, the father of the faith. Genesis chapter 16, starting in verse 1. Genesis 16, verse 1. Now Sarai, Abraham's wife, had borne him no children, and she had an Egyptian maid whose name was Hagar. So Sarah said to Abraham, Now behold, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Please go into my maid. Perhaps I shall obtain children through her. And Abraham listened to the voice of Sarai. After Abraham had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Abraham's wife Sarah took Hagar, the Egyptian, her maid, and gave her to her husband Abram as his wife. He went into Hagar, and she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her sight. I'm better than you. I'm pregnant. You're not. Oof. And Sarah said to Abraham, may the wrong done to me be upon you. And I gave my maid into your arms, but when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her sight. May the Lord judge between you and me. But Abraham said to Sarai, behold, your maid is in your power. Do to her what is good in your sight. So Sarah treated her harshly, and she fled from her presence. Children being used by the wives for what? Security, significance. Then there's jealousy and cowardice by Abraham and despising humans, and it's just amazing. Here's my security. I'm pregnant, you're not. I'm better than you. I'm more secure. That's terrible. But it's there. And that's one of the reasons, by the way, that I trust the Bible. Because the Bible is not about fairy tales. The Bible is about reality. Because this happens. This happens. Where even children are used. Isaiah chapter 10. Isaiah chapter 10. Isaiah chapter 10, verse 1. Isaiah 10, verse 1. Woe to those who enact evil statutes, and to those who constantly record unjust decisions, so as to deprive the needy of justice and rob the poor of my people of their rights, in order that the widows may be their spoil, and that they may plunder the orphans. My goodness. Using the poor to get ahead. And once again, brothers and sisters, this happens all the time. And it's not a matter of just, saying this to point out, just to be mean and look how bad. No, we need to be honest, realistic, so that then we can turn to the Lord and see how much we need the Lord. Because we human beings are something else. And that's the reality. Many other passages. And again, what's the overall, or what's the subtitle of what we're talking about here? The fall. The effects of the fall. The effects of sin entering into the human race. And we see these abuses within the family. And then there's a vicious cycle. A vicious cycle. What did we talk about husbands in Genesis chapter 4, verse 23-24? Remember Lamech? Behold, you wives of Lamech. Man, I killed a man and another boy for striking me. And Cain was avenged 7 times, Lamech 70 times 7. So don't you mess with me, woman. Men will either use their force and become forceful and even violent, or they will withdraw. And it's a vicious cycle. Because the wife just wants to have a relationship, wants to have love. And the husband tries to force, or completely withdraw. And the wife is left like, either, I'm afraid he's going to hurt me, he's going to kill me, or he's going to abandon me. Oh no, come back. And so it's a vicious cycle. A vicious cycle. So on one hand, the man can be, here's the man, here's the woman, and the man can be, the more he withdraws because he doesn't want to deal with things, the more the woman becomes desperate and tries to, come on. Or the other way. The man becomes forceful, it's like, then the woman backs off. And And it happens over and over and over and over. And sometimes the forcefulness of a husband can be jabs and stabs and joking. But there's a stab behind it. And the wife becomes more insecure, more, the Bible says it's the little foxes that ruin the garden. It's those little jabs. It's those little jokes. And over the years, it becomes a pattern. And now the relationship is not good. It's not God-honoring, you see. But the husband, many times, is the one that's either forcing or withdrawing. Neither one of those, which makes the wife secure and wants to be, really, really enjoys being around the husband. She has to because, I have to. But it's a terrible thing. Now, we saw that in Genesis chapter 4 when Lamech was forceful. What happened with Adam and Eve? Adam just stood there. I mean, the serpent was tempting Eve, and Eve took the fruit and ate, and Adam didn't do anything. He didn't do anything. In fact, Eve offered him, and he took fruit as well. And then he tried to blame God, right? What'd you do, Adam? The woman you gave to me. Okay. But he basically withdrew, was not involved when he should have been involved. And that's what I mean. Husbands will either withdraw or try to overpower. Not good. Not good. Well, the wives try to control. Genesis chapter 3, and this is, again, Genesis, the beginning, Genesis, the foundations, and Eve was the mother of all humans. Genesis chapter 3 and verse 16. I've gone over this passage in another context. I just want to point out one thing here. Part of the curse to the women is what? Verse 16, to the woman he said, I will greatly multiply your pain. In really the translation should be their conception. It says childbirth here in the New American Standard, but it's conception. And in pain you shall bring forth children, meaning delivery. And here's what I want to point out. The last part of this curse, the last part of the curse on the woman says this: your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. It sounds like, well, that's a good thing, but actually the meaning of that is this: you will want to control him, but instead of you controlling him, he's going to rule over you. Now, I want you to turn to chapter 4, just to give you the evidence of what I'm talking about, so to speak. Genesis chapter 4 and verse 7, this is when God has confronted Cain, and he's telling him, hey, why are you down? And God tells him something very interesting in verse 7. Genesis chapter 4, verse 7, if you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door, and look at this, and its desire is for you, but you must master it. The phrases are exactly the same as in Genesis 3:16, when he tells the woman, your desire is for him. God says sin. He's telling Cain, sin's desire is for you. To what? To control you, to conquer you, to be over you. But you must master it. In Genesis 3:16, it says, but he will rule over you. The same Hebrew phrases. So, that's what the woman, and that's a vicious cycle. A vicious cycle. So, in a husband, in a marriage, you have both dynamics going on, and it's a mess. It's a mess. The wife tries to control, the husband tries to force or withdraw. The more insecure she becomes, the more harder she tries, the more upset he gets, the more screaming and and that's what happens all the time. You see? So we have, and it's a vicious cycle. Repeat, 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 repeat. And that's why we say, oh, thank God he understands. Thank the Lord he's given us everything we need to change that so that we can be transformed. Because what has happened when sin entered the human race, there was an elevation, as I said, of creation over the Creator. And once that happens, everything turns inside out, chaotic, upside down, confusing. And I just want to love, but I just want to love. I just want to. Oh, and no, it becomes a huge mess. You see, the wife is trying to find life in her husband, and her husband is trying to find life in the wife. And it does not work. So once again, this is why Jesus came and said, look, why is it that you're like this? Because I gave you gifts. I gave you, the woman gives, the wife gives, and I gave the man gifts, but you start depending on those very gifts for life rather than me, God. So I have to give you pain in the very gifts I gave you. So that you will not turn to those gifts, but you will turn to me, the only source of life. And so that's why Jesus came. To pay for all of our sins. So that we will look to him for life. And so then, when the husband doesn't behave, or the wife doesn't behave, the other can turn to the Lord for life. And not try to force the husband or try to force the wife. No, it hurts, but my life comes from God. You see. And that's where our hope lies. In the Lord. Not in marriage, not in the children, not in the rest of creation, but in God and God alone. And so we have a great, great hope in all that we experience. Turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 3. 2 Corinthians chapter 3. I think that's the passage. Yes. The Apostle Paul has been talking about how the Jews were blinded and so forth. And in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 17. 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 17. Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord, there is liberty. Liberty to what? Verse 18. But we all with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are being, the Greek there word is metamorphosed. You know what happens with metamorphosis, right? A caterpillar turns into a butterfly. It metamorphs into a butterfly. We are all being going through this transformation, right? Into what? Being transformed into the same image from glory to glory, just as from the Lord the Spirit. We can all be changed, transformed, metamorphosed into more and more like the Lord Jesus Christ in his character. You see? And that's what we all need. And our hope is in the Lord, not our spouse, not our children. Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12. Verse 1. After he has explained the first 11 chapters of Romans all the wonderful, wonderful theology, anthropology, soteriology, all kinds of theology in Romans, the first 11 chapters. After he finished it, based on all that wonderful theology, chapter 12, verse 1. Therefore, here's the application of the first 11 chapters. Therefore, I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God, not whether my spouse changes or not whether my children behave or not, but on the mercies of God to present your bodies as a living and holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. And do not be conformed to this world, all the self-help books, all the techniques that is being offered out there. Do not be conformed to the world, but be transformed. And there it is again. Be metamorphosed by the renewing of your mind. To begin to think like God thinks. To value the way God values. You see? To all our being to be aligned with God's character and what God has said. Not our own natural tendencies of manipulation and control and force and authority and judgmental and all this other stuff that we do to control life. No. Going by what God says, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good, acceptable, and perfect. But we all need to be transformed. Transformed, and that's the biggest thing. So the point is, look, don't look to your spouse, don't look to your children, don't look to your circumstances. Look at what God is doing in your own heart. That's what we need to be about. Because if we start focusing on, my son behaves, I can't grow, a miserable life. Well, what's God doing in your own heart? Oh, my husband, he's terrible. What's God doing in your own heart? Oh, my wife, oh man, look out. Well, God, what's God doing in your own heart? You see? Because that's the only thing we need to look at. How are we being transformed? How are we dealing with the difficulties of life? Are we lying? Are we manipulating? Are we justifying? Are we rationalizing? Are we hiding? Are we running? Are we trying to force things? All of those are ungodly ways. All of those, you see. So to say, what is God doing with me? So that I can be transformed. Because the fall affected all of us. The fall affected all of us. And not only did it affect all of us, it affected our whole being. In other words, it affected all of us, but it affected our minds, our wills, our emotions, our bodies, our understanding, our values, our perspective. It messed us royally. And that's why we need the Lord. We need to go back to the Word, to what the Lord is doing with each one of us. You see, to reverse the effects of the fall in the marriage, in our own person. You see, and God has given us everything we need for life and godliness. He's given us everything we need. You see. Now the thing is that sometimes He uses the problems that we're facing to deal with us, right? To deal with us. Now, from here, where I'm going to jump, that was somewhat of a general look at the fall, right? A general look at the fall. We're going to start getting into specifics as you thought, oh man, I thought that was bad. There's separation from God, alienation from one another in general. There's death, there's fear, there's shame. And then the power of each one of those, man, that's bad enough. And then there's the the reality of abuses that we've been talking about, and the reality of how the husband abuses and uses the wife, and how the wife abuses and uses the husband, and how we need to be transformed. Well, let's get into a little bit more specific problems, and that is the sexual problems. And that is, again, an area that is so powerful. And if we don't understand what's happening, then, things hit us up beside the head. And we don't even know where they came from. We're just going along life and boom, something hits us like, what happened there? And boom, all of a sudden somebody's pregnant. And boom, all of a sudden somebody's getting divorced. And boom, all of a sudden there's been abuse. I don't know what happened. Huh? We need to be realistic. Because when we see the realistic elements, then we can deal with them effectively, with eyes wide open with what's really happening, you see. So let's deal a little bit into this area of sexual problems. Here's a working definition. I try to put my thought, what's this sexuality? All right. So let me give you a definition, and we'll work off of that. All right. It's not perfect. It's not inspired. But here it is. A working definition of sex: the God-created dimension of personality is part of a personality that affects the whole person, and is characterized by erotic responses to an exclusive oneness with another. Remember what I said? God's given us all things to enjoy. And the sexual union is the most powerful experience, listen to this, of a taste of God, of being one with God, of experiencing the other person in just absolute union, you see. But, as I said before, we take what God has given us as gifts in creation, and we elevate it to the point of being more important than God. And once that happens, downhill it goes. And so, I'm just going to go through a list of things. A list of sexual problems, right? And this all came because of the fall in general, right? Sin entered into the human race, and it affected everything, and it affected the sexual union, the sexual experience in the human race. So here we go. Again, there's no priority here. I just wrote down a list of things of how, this problem shows itself up. And it's a big problem. The problem of no commitment. This is the issue of premarital sex. Premarital sex. And nowadays, of course, it is especially rampant, right? People either just living together or having 2 or 3 partners or more. And now young girls are boasting about it. Young girls are showing pornography to each other and to young guys. I mean, it's just happening. It's just mind-boggling. That's why I was thinking the other day, this is kind of on my side, but I was thinking the other day, man, if we could just get our politics straight, dream on. But then I thought, no, man, even if we get our politics right now, the moral cesspool, the moral decline is like straight down. It's awful. And people don't understand the destructive power of immorality, sexual immorality. And so this whole area of premarital sex, there's no, in premarital sex, there's a lack of a permanent commitment, right? Permanent commitment. And as part of, God gave us the sexuality to enjoy within a permanent commitment, in a permanent exclusivity, right? And it begins with the very nature of God, because God says, what? Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Why? Because He's the only God. And there needs to be this unique, exclusive commitment to the only God. Right? And within marriage, we're saying there's exclusive, there is a commitment to this one person, reflecting our relationship with God. You see? But with premarital sex, it's like, well, I'm committed to you till tomorrow morning. I'm committed to you as long as you make me feel good. I'm committed. There's no permanent commitment. There's no marriage there. You see? And it violates God's ways. No permanent commitment. And then what happens with that? Well, deep at the deepest level of our being, we know it's not right. We know we have done something wrong. It's just there. And so now there's guilt. There's guilt. When there's been premarital sex, there is guilt. And once there is guilt, then the person tries to make up for it and hide it and rationalize it. And, like someone said, oh, you're going to bring a burnt sacrifice to pay for your own sins. But it never works. It never works. The only way, the only source of forgiveness is through the Lord Jesus Christ. So there needs to be an acknowledgement, and then a confession to the Lord, and the receiving of forgiveness. And God is there to restore us, right? To restore us. But when there's this premarital sex, there's no commitment, and if there's no commitment, then there's guilt after there's been this experience of premarital sex. That's one problem, guilt, right? Another problem is that now there's a polluted conscience. I mean, guilt is there, but then more images come, more memories come, and here we go, and now we have a polluted conscience. And so really the same thing again. We begin to try and make up, hide, deny, distract, blame other people, point to other people's bad doings, so that we don't have to face what's here, because we have a polluted conscience. So guilt, polluted conscience. And then we are in pre-marriage counseling with misrepresenting God. We're misrepresenting this commitment to God, the only true God. And with that misrepresentations, now again, it's like, I'm no good, I have messed up. Now that it's like someone said, once we start messing up, we can start feeling like a used styrofoam cup. How precious is a used styrofoam cup? And because we feel that way, then we start, okay, well then just let it all hang out, because I'm not good anymore. I'm a used product, you see. And down it goes. So this premarital sex, it's and then there's a broken trust as well. Broken trust because the person says, they don't say this verbally, maybe not even consciously, but here's the point. If you were willing to dishonor God, if you were willing to disobey God, how in the world can I trust you? There's a mistrust, a broken trust now in the relationship. And once again, there's remedy for that, right? We go to the Lord with brokenness and we receive the forgiveness. But many times people are not even aware of that. So they get into a relationship and they even get married. But then there's always this guilt and broken trust. It's like, can I trust him? Can I trust him? They broke over there before we got married, so how can I trust him now? And you see, it's a huge mess. It's a huge mess. And I'm afraid for some of these, young people, because by the time they get married, they're all wounded and full of guilt and full of shame. And then they start blaming each other and fighting and jealousy and insecurity, and here we go. Here we go. Okay, let's call the pastor for counseling. But that's what happens, you see. And that's why we need to go back to the Lord. Go back to the Lord. Forgive me. Here's the truth, Lord. Here's the truth. And Jesus says, okay, See that hole right there? It's okay, I paid for it. You've confessed, you've come to me. We can restore you. But there needs to be an acknowledgement. Because again, premarital sex, it brings so much trash and destruction. So you begin with, the way back is what? To grieve and heal from premarital sex for a healthier marriage. There needs to be an acknowledgement and a remorse over sin. Say, Lord, yes, forgive me, Lord, forgive me. It wasn't right. Because when we don't do that, people can get hooked on immorality. And it doesn't have to be that they go out and commit adultery, but it might be pornography, or it might be sexual jokes, or it might be just glances. But all of that is destroying the marriage, is wounding the partner if you don't deal with it. But many times it's progressive to get worse and worse and worse to the point that there's an addiction. An addiction. Why? Because there was a substitution of God with this immorality to begin with. You see? And when there's substitution of God, it'll never, 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 ever work. So you got to have more and more and more. And it becomes an addiction. Colossians chapter 3, in the New Testament, Colossians chapter 3. And verse 5. Colossians chapter 3 and verse 5. Therefore, put to death or consider the members of your earthly body as dead to immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and greed, which amount to, what does it say there? Idolatry. Idolatry. What's idolatry? An idol. An idol is a replacement of God. You see? And so immorality can become an idol because it feels so powerful. It feels so good. So there needs to go back and deal with it in the way God has helped us to give us all that we need to deal with these things. And our hope is in Him and His work. His work to forgive us, to heal us, to transform us, and to become stronger so that we can have life and be able to give life to others. Rather than taking life from somebody else, we can give life. That's God's work. Now, sex was created by God, not Hugh Hefner. Sex was created by God to give us a taste of being one with God, not the replacement of God. Like everything else. It's a taste of the goodness of God, you see. All within the bounds of marriage, because commitment and exclusivity. Why do we say in the vows when people get married? And usually I try to make sure that they include this in their vows because I give them a choice of the vows. Forsaking all others. Because there's something very powerful about being a solid commitment to exclusivity that resonates with God's commandment, thou shalt have no other God before me. No idol, sir. Thank you. So within marriage, He gave us sexuality to give us a taste of God, not a replacement of God. And let me say again, why is sex so powerful? Sex is the fastest and most powerful to get to the soul, to penetrate to the soul. The sexual experience can get our hearts, our emotions going fast and deep and super intense. It's like having super, super, super high grade cocaine. A tiny little, woo, we're in heaven, woo! Powerful, powerful drug. Sex is that way. And that's why pornography is a billions and billions of dollars industry all over the world. It's powerful, very powerful. And that's why when you get to the Old Testament and the New Testament, God has very, very clear instructions, because the power of it is just amazing. The quickest and most powerful soul penetration. I've said this in the past. A young child can be ruined for life by 5 seconds of pornography. 5 seconds of showing a picture, take it off, for the rest of their life, they can be ruined. Pretty powerful stuff, you see. And so in our times especially, man, my, was being promoted. I reposted something that Liz Wheeler from One American News posted on the halftime show. I didn't watch it. We walked out. The men walked out of the place because we knew what was coming. And it's like, okay, this is what children are watching. This is what's being promoted as empowering women. Oh, my goodness. What rationalization. What destructive power we are unleashing. But everything, okay, it's fine. Ooh, cool. Yeah. Eating cancer. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You see, man, people don't understand. People don't understand. And again, you got to remember, sex was created by God, not some pervert. You see? And it's to be thoroughly enjoyed within marriage. It's a taste of God. But it is so powerful, and abused all the time. And this came because of the fall, right? When sin entered the human race. When we come to the husband may just want to experience sex, not really care for the wife. And the wife begins to sense that. You're not really caring for my soul. And away we go. And the wife can merely use sex as a means of control. And amazing. I mean, women in general can use that, right? So the women are gonna dress half naked only to control you and make you grovel. This guy says, well, there's this girl in a bikini walking downtown, but she has this mean looking, dog beside her, this massive dog. You can watch, but don't you touch, man. I'll unleash this dog in you. You'll be shredded to pieces. But I'm going to make you look. That's an extreme. But, it happens, right? And we need to be realistic about it. And both men and women abuse it. With that comes what? All kinds of confusion. Because I have this urge. How can I stop it? Oh, I'm condemned. Confusion. Right? Because it's been used and abused, and then it becomes all confusing inside. And fights and anger and chaos and, there again, the effects of the fall. How can something so good, given by God, be so dirty and vile? How do you make sense of that? You see? It's like any other thing in creation. that is used and abused, elevated to the point of idolatry above God, and it creates chaos and confusion and frustration and anger and so forth. You see? So this is what happens. And is very similar. Someone said, husbands say, no sex, no love. Wife says, no love, no sex. And here we go. Instead of the husband really, really caring for the wife and ministering to her, and the wife really, really respecting the husband, not using sex as a control issue, you see. And it's an ongoing need to go to the Lord, and because within a marriage, because we're talking about marriage and family, to attend to. So that's the part of the issues with sexual problems in one way. Here's another way. That was premarital sex. Now, marital infidelity. Marital infidelity, and I'll go quickly through this one, and we'll stop there to ask any questions or comments that you want to make. And then the following time, we'll get into reunion with God. And we'll need to obviously talk a lot about that because of all these problems that we've been discussing. So premarital sex, and now marital infidelity. Marital infidelity. People use this all kinds of excuses, especially husbands. Oh, my wife is not loving me. I'm desperate. So here we go. Go look somewhere else. And nowadays, more and more women are doing that. More and more women. It's amazing when you look at the statistics. The growth in women using pornography is like, what? Yeah, unbelievable. And many, many more women now are leaving their children behind and just having the husband take care of them. And they're gone. It's like, man, amazing, amazing. But there's a desperation to experience fulfillment. And so within a marriage, when there isn't this good union of talking through things and touching each other's soul and working through things together, then there's a greater and greater separation, a greater and greater loneliness, and the soul becomes desperate for fulfillment, desperate for connection. And so sometimes either the wife or the husband, a simple smile by somebody else, like, life, there's life. It feels so good that somebody smiled at me. That's how desperate things get. And so downhill it goes because there's a desperation to experience fulfillment. And as we talked about at the beginning, how God created us to really enjoy each other rationally, emotionally, volitionally, physically, in every which way. And when there isn't that, then there's a more and more greater desperation. And of course, when we've put human beings above God, that becomes also a desperation. So that's some of the impetus, some of the motivations of what happens in marital infidelity. Wife that is not loved and cherished, she becomes lonelier and lonelier because the husband is missing her soul. The husband is really missing where she is at. Every time I do premarriage counseling, I have to, go through the effects of the fall and the curse on the woman and the curse on the man. And when the man misses the woman's soul, it's terrible. It's really terrible. And sometimes we men are just like, what? Me? We're totally, completely lost. We don't get it because we haven't taken the time to look at what God says. You see? And so the woman feels unloved, not cherished. It's awful. It's awful. So then the wife may not be merely commit adultery, but she may put all her time now into the children because that's her life now. It's not the husband. And then the husband starts feeling it, it's like, then it's a huge problem. Now, the husband may not feel respected. The wife may have okay, now I have a few children, forget you, bye. I'm going to concentrate on my career, I'm going to concentrate on my children, you're of no count. You make me feel used anyway, so boom. And then the husband becomes desperate, and no matter how much he tries, there's no excuse, no excuse. Why? Why? Because God is the source of life, not other human beings. So there's no excuse. But there can be an understanding as to why things are happening the way they are. You see? The wife needs to be loved and cherished. The husband needs to be respected and empowered. Sex, marital infidelity can be a source or a means of hostility. A means of hostility. I'm going to use sex as an action against you. It's awful, but it happens all the time. Of course, the most clear example is rape, right? That people violate somebody else, and it's obviously that's what they call it, an assault. It's rape. But it doesn't have to be to that degree. Proverbs chapter 5, verse 3. Proverbs chapter 5, I think this is the right passage. Look at this. Proverbs chapter 5, verse 3, 4, and 5. It says this. Well, let me start from verse 1. Proverbs chapter 5, verse 1. My son, give attention to my wisdom. Incline your ear to my understanding, that you may observe discretion, and your lips may reserve knowledge. For the lips of an adulteress drip honey, and smoother than oil is her speech. But in the end, she is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps take hold of Sheol. Wow. Wow. Sometimes these beautiful women, what does Jack Nicklaus say? Some women are so beautiful, they render men helpless. They're so beautiful. But women can use that beauty to only destroy a man. She may have her lips of honey, but only to get somebody, some man, as a form of hostility. And obviously, men are just as guilty. Just as guilty. All I'm saying is, the sexual and infidelity, whatever can be, is a form of hostility. Of hostility. Turn to Proverbs 9, verse 17. Proverbs 9, verse 17. Stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. Wow. Adultery. I know this is wrong, but and usually forbidden things are exciting. Rebellion is exciting. You see, what is forbidden? I know I'm not supposed to, but that's the reality, right? And especially sexual immorality, infidelity. And that's why, again, it's so powerful, because sometimes in the marriage, things are dead. They're dead. They haven't connected in a long time. And all of a sudden, somebody looks at them and like, what happened to my soul? Man, my heart started going 100 miles an hour. That felt good. Life. Isn't that amazing? And the Bible says, stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. Verse 18, but he does not know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of Sheol. Isn't that crazy? It can feel so powerful, so good, like a high off of something, but man, the dead are there. Wow. And then sometimes it's mystique, right? Somebody is behind sunglasses with a hat, and they're like, who is that person? Kind of mystique. I wonder what they're like. And they start doing that number, but it's all for manipulation. It's all for manipulation, you see. It's better to look at somebody clearly, eyeball to eyeball. What's going on? You see. But we use all these tricks, and it's all part of the fall, the problem of sex. Misused, abused, outside of God's bounds. The dead are there. And once again, there's redemption. Because God knows. God knows. So he says, I've provided everything you need for you. 1 Peter chapter 3. I'll use this as the last passage. Let's see. No, 1 Peter chapter 2. 1 Peter chapter 2. Verse 23. You're talking about, verse 22, talking about Jesus, right, when he was being crucified and abused, who committed no sin, nor was sin any deceit found in his mouth, and while being reviled, he did not revile in return. While suffering, he uttered no threats, but kept entrusting himself to him who judges righteously. And he himself bore our sins in his body on the cross, so that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. For by his wounds you were healed. So this is the means, this is the resource for healing for all the sexual garbage that some of us have gone through. You see, there is healing. By his wounds you are healed. And that's our hope, right? For you were continually straying like sheep, but now you have returned to the shepherd and guardian of your souls. So is it time for you and me to return to the shepherd and guardian of our souls? The answer is, of course, we do, all of us, at some level, need to return to the Lord, because that's what's going to be our healing. But before we go there, we need to acknowledge the realities of what has happened. If we don't acknowledge, it's like I have this massive, massive sore. And instead of dealing with it, let me put gauze and bandages and more gauze and then put real nice colored tape. Oh, doesn't that look nice? I haven't dealt with anything. I've just covered it up. You see? And sometimes in life, that's what we do. We just cover things up. But the sore gets worse and worse and worse. And there's pus, and there's green stuff, and it smells. Oh, put more gauze. Make it look prettier. Maybe put a flower with somebody's signature there, right? No. Best thing is to look honestly at the fall. Uses and abuses within the marriage, within the family, even using children, using sex in an illegitimate way, immorality, marital infidelity, and so forth.
So let my life be the proof